Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, I'm no qua, Osinachi. One lemon, Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, mama, Osinachi.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, I'm no qua, Osinachi. One lemon, Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, mama, Osinachi. Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. I'm no qua, Osinachi. One money, Osinachi. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. Mama, Osinachi. Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. I'm no qua, Osinachi. One money, Osinachi. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. Mama, Osinachi.
End the session.
Any presenter? Okay, thank you so much. Okay, I. Hi, Professor Oluwadamilola. Is that you first?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Thank you so much. So it's time already, and we have a panelist here in
Okay.
person. Yeah, we have a panelist in person, and we have two panelists joining us online.
All right. So good afternoon, everyone. You can call me Dami, and I'll be the one moderating this session. So the first participant that we have or panelist is Emilion Adekoya. Emilion Adekoya is a third-year PhD candidate at Stony Brook University, New York. Our research focuses on anti-Black surveillance in mobility, transnational queer politics, African sexuality studies, and colonial and post-colonial governmentalism. A PhD dissertation is tentatively titled Hypervisible Bodies in Motion, African LGBTQ asylum seekers navigating racialization and criminalization in the United States. Today, she will be presenting on the pedalization of Black Africa, the support of Black migrants, beds in.
Good afternoon. Can you all confirm that you can see my screen, both on Zoom and in the room?
Yes, we can see it in the room.
Okay, amazing. Hi, everyone. My name is Emilia. I'm a PhD candidate at Stony Brook University. And today I'll be presenting my paper titled The Epidemialization of Blackness in North Africa, the Politics of European Border Externalization and Black African Migrant Deathbeds in Libya and Morocco. This paper exactly focuses on, the focus of this paper is on race, how the externalization of borders by the EU to Libya and Morocco is actually fracturing the humanity of Black people, Black African migrants, particularly in Libya and Morocco. Okay.
Hi, Emilia. Can you please
Yeah.
put your presentation on a slideshow? Slideshow, so it can
It
be
is
more.
on a,
Oh, it is. All right. Okay, it is now.
can you see it right now? Okay. I was seeing it on a slideshow. Yeah, I didn't know it's not on a slideshow. Yeah. So contracted. Can you all still see my screen and hear me?
You can't see your screen anymore.
What's going on? Hold on, please. What about now?
No.
It's visible on
Yeah, we can see it
Now
on
it's
Zoom.
fine. Yes, you can see your screen now.
Okay, all right, okay. All right, clearly looking at politics of contracted border policing, that is the externalization of borders and how it actually impacts humanity of Black African migrants in Libya and Morocco. So in what is now popularly known as the Five Eyes, the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand came together during the Second World War to create an Anglo-spheric intelligence of surveillance alliance, where these countries share intelligence as it pertains to national security. Post 9/11 and following the 2015 migration crisis in Europe, however, this Anglospheric intelligence has metamorphosized into what Deirdre Bigo refers to as the panopticon, which is an exclusionary logic of surveillance, as these allied countries share migration-related intelligence in a risk management approach, that is, tracing migrants' histories, records, organizations, affiliations to determine good and desirable or dangerous and undesirable migrants. Techniques for binoticon have actually metamorphosized into global apartheid system that seek to construct migrants, particularly Black and brown bodies, from the global south through this lens of crime, a concept which Kachgar Franco actually refers to as crime migration. These techniques for migrant policing have extended from visa politics, detention and deportation logics to now include externalization of borders. So while borders were once a site for the excessive display of national security power, borders in recent times have, however, become stretchy and fluid meshwork that have outgrown their physical positions and shifted to third countries who are meant to keep their citizens or citizens of neighboring nations. Border externalization or contracted border policing is the outsourcing of borders to countries on a different development pool. The United States actually outsources its border policing to Mexico. It's currently doing it with Libya and Morocco. The whole structure of externalization is actually built on huge incentive manipulations of foreign aids. That is, foreign aid is at the time premised on the cooperation of these countries to contracted border policing. Organization of United States borders to El Salvador, Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras is done in exchange for and Silicon Valley technology innovation. In the case of Libya and Morocco, however, the EU trains and equips Libyan and Moroccan coast guards for at-sea and on-land capture of migrants. It provides both countries with surveillance technologies, and it has also lobbied the United Nations Maritime Organization to recognize an enlarged search and rescue zone for Libya's wider coastal reach, in addition to other financial incentives. Up to use the Atlantic Ocean as a route into. However, I'm paying closer attention to Libya and Morocco's approach to border policing and the violence faced by migrants caught in the politics of border externalization. By closely examining the question of border externalization, who bears the associated risks and responsibilities, and how does border externalization redefine race relations in North Africa? This presentation is actually developed on, so now I'm going to my theory and method. This presentation is actually developed on an anti-Black surveillance in migration framework, which builds on theories of anti-Black racialization, critical migration studies, and surveillance studies to actually investigate how local historical connections of Blackness intersect with contemporary border policing of sub-Saharan migrants. I define race as this historical and contemporary contingent formation, and I argue that the racialization of Blackness is emerging in North Africa's true order to signify an inferior social status and that this racialization and epidemialization of Blackness actually from my views actually I'll be showing us just the 2024 African migrant chart flow. Within Sub-Saharan and Europe, there were 9,000 dead or missing migrants in 2024 alone. And within Libya alone, who were either dead or who either died or disappeared in Libya. Between Morocco, the Atlantic Ocean, and Canary Island, we had 9,757 dead or missing migrants, and Morocco actually accounted for 1,337 dead or missing migrants. So I'm looking specifically at the epidemialization of Blackness. looking at Libya and Morocco as sites where the humanity of Black people gets fractured, where race on the body. As many of us may know, North Africans don't with Middle East. And we saw an example of this during the last African Cup of Nations with Sofiane Buffet, who credited, his goal to Arab people instead of Africans anyway. So epidemialization is this moment of the inscription of race on the body, the fracturing of the body from its humanity, negative racialized position. I look at race as a geographical concept of value. Okay. Can we still see my screen? Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. So I look at race as this geographical concept of value that signifies a status of hierarchy from superior to inferior and a marker of spatial belonging. Now, I'll be walking us through my data collected. The first, I look at the hypersexualization as racialization. And we see this tactic of hypersexualization as a tactic that Europeans used during the time of colonization in Africa, musterizing the bodies of African women and describing African women as people with elongated breasts and, other such stereotypes. So one of my participants, Baraka, who is 30 years old, actually told me that she left Nigeria in 2004 to Libya. Her agent promised her that he had secured everything that she actually needed regarding a passage to Italy. She left her 4 kids behind and left with money that people had contributed with her. Her agent actually lied to her. Nothing was sorted. Her trip to Libya was hard. She was harassed twice within Nigeria. To Libya after 5 months. She was sold to slavery the very week she entered Libya. To armed men who she was sold to slavery the very week. She was sold to armed men who kept other African migrants as slaves. Her owners and his friends actually called her a black diara, that is a prostitute, and forced themselves on her many times. She escaped with her Ghanaian friends in 2006. However, Barakat returned to Nigeria in December 2006 and left for Egypt in June 2007 with the help of the Nigerian Islamic Mission. Egypt was no different, according to her. The only job she could get was a live-in maid, but she didn't know that it wasn't actually a maid position, but a live-in prostitute job. Her boss and his friend did as they liked with her, torturing her, ordering their dog to lick her and things like that. With everything, she was never paid a dime. She became terribly sick and realized that it was HIV in 2010. And she said that she had to come back home because she would rather die at home than be buried as a dog in Egypt. Baraka actually sadly passed away in 2024 from HIV complications. Now, I want to walk us through the semblance between racialized slavery, letting us see that the same logic of racialization or the epidemialization of Blackness in North Africa is actually very similar or bears close semblance with the racialization of African bodies during American slavery. On the left, we can see the branding of African slaves or enslaved Africans before they were actually transported to Europe. We can see the branding going on. And on the right is Samuel, was captured in Libya. He was trafficked in Libya, and you can see the scarring on his face. So the scarring on his face was actually as a result of branding. His trafficker actually branded his face as a sort of ownership, recognition of ownership, that is fracturing his humanity and thereby branding him as or he owns. And Labrador actually said that he was treated as if he wasn't actually human. Moving on, I actually also want us to see the animalization of that is currently going on in Libya, that's currently going on to Black migrants in Libya. So we have who is 35 and from Libya. He was kept in a windowless room with about 40 other with about 40 other men who were from Ghana, Nigeria, Gambia, Senegal, and other places in Africa. He said they were all Black, and they organized weekly parties like auctions where they sold them. It was sold to a Libyan man for 100 dinar, and he took it was taken to Bandi Wali in Libya. It described his purchaser as a sick man who kept other Black men like him and made them work for 15 hours a day. He used to say that they weren't better than dogs, and sometimes they were fed the same food as dogs. No one should treat his fellow. And on the left, you can actually see the ledger that was used during Euro-American slavery, whereby Black Africans
Emilian, can you hear us?
All right, thank you for the wonderful presentation, Emilian. Our next panelist is Abubakar Muhammad. Abubakar is a graduate student in African Cultural Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He was a Fulbright Fellow at the university before joining the graduate school. He has eclectic research interests, including youth and street culture, mobility, and migration. Today, we'll be presenting a paper titled Time Margin, Life in Motion and Liminality of Floating Subjects. Abubakar, take it away. And please note that you have 20 minutes. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Damilola, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm Abubakar Muhammad, a graduate student from the Department of African Cultural Studies. I will be talking about the life of immigrants in the United States in the context of the bureaucracy and the legalization of their papers. The experience that they went. I used Behold the Dreamer, written by Imbole Imbu, a Cameroonian American writer who analyzed the temporal experience of African immigrant and asylum seekers in the US. So, in the book, the protagonist Jende and Nene, his wife, arrived in the United States on a tourist and student visa, respectively. They have been a while in the country, but they are still stuck in the immigration process. To move forward, especially for Jende, he needs to change their legal status. Therefore, for him, so I forgot, excuse me, if I can share my screen, or Dami, you go ahead and share the. Okay, so let me.
You can share your screen, Abubakar. Or do you want me to do it for you?
Let me do it now. Excuse me. So here we are, right?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So for him, asylum is the best way to get the paper and remain in the country. Right there, Jende gets into social jet lag with the immigration system. It has been 3 years of fighting for this. However, it should be worthwhile for him to enjoy the wait, given the tangible benefit entailed in American legal residency and citizenship. He hires an immigration lawyer, ran a story that girlfriend in his hometown. They loved each other, but the father would not let him marry the daughter on grounds of social standing. Then they got her pregnant. Her father put him in prison and promised to kill him. The lawyer said this is a perfect immigration story. What is left is for Jende to supply the evidence for the application to get started, a process that brings him neck deep into contact with the state bureaucracy. Okay, so talk overview of the things that I will be sharing with you. You can see some of the issues that I will be talking about their experience immigrant from Africa. Okay, so most African literature on migration are focused largely on the figuration of socio-cultural milieu. However, this paper shows dimensions of temporalities in the life of African immigrants and asylum seekers in the US. African asylum seekers in the US, like much of this category elsewhere, go through temporal experience that runs from intense hope to despair, boredom, uncertainty, and frustration. There are many dimensions of temporalities, however. My paper is restricted to only 4 in order to discuss Gende's experience and his encounter with the US immigration system. So the key finding is to say that Behold the Dreamer, the novel, published in 2016 by Mbole Mbu, is about Cameroonian immigrant in the US, Jende and Nene. They came to the country to determine to win over the system and acquire legal residency. Jende started the bureaucratic process and hopes things to happen quickly. However, bureaucracy has its own way of operation. Jende and his wife lived their entire stay in the US in liminal indeterminacy, anxiety, and hope while they face imminent deportation. Immigration uses time to create temporal experience of boredom and uncertainty in immigrant and asylum seekers. So, here in this context, so briefly my research method before going into say that I'm using textual analysis and critical discourse of creative work, which is the book that to show the experience of those characters in this story, which of course is but reflect the real life of many African immigrants. So we begin with temporal liminality. This is one of the places or stages that immigrants went through. So in this case, this kind of experiences means impermanence or in-betweenness. In this context, it can mean a moment of indeterminacy and uncertainty in the immigration process. It sits between protracted period of time and rush of time, which affects current daily routine and emotions of the immigrant. In the case of Jenny and Nenny, the biggest trait among them, like all the asylum seekers, just someone making decision about the lack of insecurity from the constant tension between imminent refusal and sudden approval. So we move on to bureaucracy and the use of time. Time is central to the framing of social life of asylum seekers. A slow institution with easy schedule, bureaucracy uses time as powerful tool of control. It's too fast and too slow simultaneously. It can speed up and slow down time to create effective temporality, that is a sense of dislocation and uncertainty in the life of asylees, which brings us to the important link in temporal experience, which is the error signal. Error signal is a situation when something is taking too long or too short to happen. In migration studies and temporalities, this is defined as either slow passage of time or quick rush passage of time. This can be deliberate act by bureaucratic system subjects. So for the asylum system, what the question of how emotions and senses relate to time. Body signals are believed to be part of the everyday experience of here and now and provide the basis of perceptions of noiseless footing of time. So here we have 4 dimensions of temporalities listed by Melanie Gritz in her article 2014, talking about the Brazilian experience in London. So we begin with sticky time. Sticky time is characterized by slowness. Slowness is a frequent complaint among travelers. This goes back to the first point of moving. The first point of complaint starts at visa process and boarding. The space between take-off, passage, cruising, and landing is actually felt moment among the travelers, characterized by the darkness. Tende was stuck in Limbe in Cameroon before he came to the US. However, when he arrived, he planned to stay permanently in the country, which would take years to get the papers. What immediately as Jende did is circumscribed in hope. Jende adheres to the virtue of waiting. Being made to wait, however, is inextricably bound up in power dynamics and dominance. Sticky time is constituted dead time. Thus, socially expected wait time for gender extends into the future of uncertain period of waiting. He and his wife eventually find themselves suspended in sticky time. Suspended time, which is next to sticky time, is a period of directionless stasis. It's associated with immigration system in which detainees and asylees experience endless, irrational, and meaningless time of waiting. This creates a sense of temporal liminality and forced idleness. Jende has never been physically detained in the story, but there is a temporal barrier in the materiality of his being that barricaded him from being part of the rest of the society. So he experienced timeless presence in the condition that maintains temporal entrampment. Without valid papers, he finds himself unable to move back or forward while the rest of the world goes by. So talking about frenzy time, after endless waiting, frenzy time is a sudden change in temporal pace. Now immigration wanted to make decision about your situation. So it can be very rushed or slow. So frenzy moment can manifest in forced movement of people, which gives birth to moment of panic and hysteria, like gender experience. It's associated with great dramatic upheaval. Time accelerates quickly and rushes out of control. Deportation and removal bring an accelerated sense of time. Once the government begins removal proceedings against Jande, he could not process the enormity of the situations and wonders aloud if this means he's going to leave America, which of course he is. So in this case, development can happen suddenly and without warning, which hinders external support from others. When Jende finally opts to leave the country on his own and reveals the decision to his employer, Mr. Clark Edward, it was Clark's offer to give a legal support. That's when frenzy time already takes over. So temporal rupture is a carryover from the dramatic effects of frenzy time when that can bring about a sense of dislocation of temporal and geographical expectations, which then delayed in exchange for his willingness to leave the country and save the government taxpayers' money. While frenzied time is associated with forced movement of people, but the underlying conditions of his decision to move constituted involuntary mobility. The deportation letter that was sent him is unexpected and unwelcome decision on his wish. The cruel power of deportation produced acute rupture in his life. So the temporal rupture is a form of liminality in this sense, an uncertainty that displaces a basis and anchor in the life of the asylum seekers. What makes deportation particularly felt moment is that it's a last-minute legal decision that entails bureaucratic problems. Jende's case does not involve the sudden and unexpected moment of being taken to the airport and hauled into the available flight. Nonetheless, deportation is forced dislocation against him, which is why he employed various strategies of diversion to evade the system. So in conclusion, my paper shows the experience of African asylum seekers in the US immigration system. Time for the protagonist in The Behold the Dreamer is marked by waiting, which leads to other temporal effects, including boredom and uncertainty. Jende and Neni, his wife, go through these experiences until they finally go back to their home country. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Abubakar. I'm sure, like people have a lot of questions and we'll address that in the Q&A section. So our third and final panelist for today is Nima Munisi. Nima is an assistant lecturer in the Department of History and Archaeology at the University of Dublin. Archaeologist with specialization in glass beads. Nima's research interest lies at the intersection of indigenous technology and materiality, with particular emphasis on understanding the symbolism, meaning, production, technology, and consumption of glass beads among the Swahili societies in East Africa. So Nima, over to you.
Thank you. Please allow me to stand. I think I will be more comfortable with stand. Thank you very much. And today I'm going to present my presentation entitled Ethnicity, Material Culture, and Cultural Identity in the Swahili Coast. I wish we had more time so that I can answer you. I mean, I can ask you a question and I get your answer. Like, what makes you, because of time, allow me to go on. For many centuries, the Indian Ocean has been a medium of sociocultural interactions among people living on the island, on its island, along its littoral and deep hinterland. And this has led to sociocultural identity as well as economic flow between the coast, island, and interior in terms of dynamic or diffusion process. And so the available evidence appears in terms of several things, including ceramic traditions such as Mpope, triangular incised ware, spinning from the Swahili Coast Island and interior all the way to countries like Zambia, Mozambique, and Malawi. So next slide. So using these glass beads, I will show you the impact of these social cultural interactions that I'm saying, interesting ethnicity, culture, as well as cultural identity in Kilimanjaro, and southern Tanzania. Most of patriots, they make a very minimal utilization of material culture, such as glass beads, ceramics, which they encounter during excavation in archaeological sites. And whenever they use them, their uses or their research is limited to things like finding out the chronological markers of those items, but also identifying maybe indicators of trade relations. And so consequently, the potential is to unravel things like ethnicity, to unravel things like cultural identity or interaction of vast community is not really fully touched. And so the meaning of this to their to past users remain less unknown. So in connection with the ethnographic studies, we are now being enlightened on significant issues that were previously overlooked because of just relying on few things like the state, such as wealth, identity, classes, belief, and things like that. In connection of this next slide, please, there has been two prevailing issues. There are those believing in the Eurocentric kind of view, and there are those believing in the Afrocentric kind of view. Because with Eurocentric view, they see imported goods as prestige goods, as things that were exclusively accessed by elites. Why? It's because the elites, they use a lot of expenses to transport those goods from outside to come into Africa. And so the item must be expensive and only to not have access to them. And so they believed imported goods were only accessed by a few people who are elites, and those are Eurocentric scholars. While Afrocentric scholars believe even Africans who were not elites had access to imported goods. Why? Because they view that Africans consumed those goods, followed their pre-existing cultural laws. They consumed the goods following the meaning behind the use of those goods that were they consumed. And so other determinants of power, such other determinants of power and status were, according to Afrocentric now, they would say that wealth is maybe being wealth in people. People know you very much, you can convince people, your knowledge. Those are how Africans considered prestige and not those imported goods which Eurocentric considered as prestige. According to Afrocentric view, they consider things like knowledge, your wealth in knowledge, your wealth in people, wealth in individual entrepreneurship and things like that. And so that argument that Africans had access to imported goods, and this research was undertaken to contribute to this growing discussion on the issue of meaning of material culture, interesting ethnicity, cultural identity in consumption or uses items among the ancient cities of Kilimanjaro. The research was guided by precedent theory, which was introduced by Friedman and Rodland in 1977, where he said exotic goods such as glass beads and porcelain were provided wealth and prestige to people, and he considered factors as cost, as I explained earlier, fragility of the items, like transporting the porcelain from side to Africa. There could be accidents, things get break and things like that. And so the cost of item now could be high. But as well as transport, it made those imported goods to be expensive. And so Smith 1999 also identified standards of materials at the site, as well as the context of deposition, can say, okay, it's one of the characters of display of understanding this prestige item. That's when you find there is low number of such kind of things, then that means they were not high access to many. But we see now this theory ignores some of the things. It's basically only economically. It ignores things like cultural meaning, beliefs of people, and things like that. And so this theory, the present good theory, guided me to compare means, access as imported goods, as well as cultural logic behind the consumption of different types of goods towards shaping ethnicity, cultural identity in the ancient Kilwa community. As I've said, my research was done in Kilwa, and Kilwa is located on the southern part of Tanzania. This red one here, this is the slide. Kilwa has been nominated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1981, following the criterion #3, and it has been inhabited since Middle Stone Age, a period with evidence for early iron working found in Runi. This is the next slide where it's located. However, Kilwa became vibrant from early second millennium PE. Five people buying it from Middle Stone Age, but it became vibrant from early iron working. Early second millennium is when it became vibrant. And it was vibrant as a commercial hub between Africa and the outside world. When things were coming in, it usually passed people to interior. So it was a commercial hub. And so the monumental buildings which are found in Kilwa, and some of them are still standing, justify the wealth of archive here trade in Kilwa. However, now Kilwa as a city started to decline from 15th century when the arrival of Portuguese started. Next slide. This here is the map that shows previously. The map, I've said previously that it was inhabited in Burundi, which is here, and the materials which were found in Burundi include the early Iron Age. And as you can see, most of the settlements are densely near the ocean compared to far away from the ocean. As you can see, right? Yeah. So most of the monuments or the population was densely around here rather than far away from the sea. And so due to that, scholars have classified this city as there are places where elites were staying and places where commoners were staying. And the places where elites were staying, this is the place where we find these big monumental buildings, which are some of them just there. And so these were the people who had access to these resources we call precious goods. And these were the people who had power, but also the monumental architecture and world settlement justify it. But there's still archaeological visible. But this area where we find less monuments, less monumental remains, where the commoners or inhabitants, the people who have no access to resources or power. And mostly they occupy the work of that houses, which archaeologically is hard to trace on this. And they were located far away from the ocean. where elite walled houses are. And I'm saying that logically are not well visible. In this research, I've used several data collection techniques. One of them was documentary resources, or documentary resource, where I went through translated Asian travelers reports. I went through several articles, the Arabic reports, the Arabic Chinese, all of which were written about English life, and that's were found there. But I also did excavation. I'm an archaeologist, so there's no research about. I also did excavation, as you see one of the things that. And I excavated 3 trenches, Bengal, Burundi, and Istanbul. But thereafter, I went to analyze I visited the National Museum of Tanzania, where some of the documents and remains are kept. I analyzed the materials that were obtained from elite settlements. This was to compare with the materials which I excavated from the commoners' settlements. And so these were compared, those reported from settlement of the elites and still of Kiswahili, which these materials are obtained from National Museum of Tanzania. So I have materials from both elite settlements and commoners' settlements. But also I did ethnographic studies. Mainly I documented contemporary cultural practices surrounding these bits found in Kiswahili, so as to compare the ecological bits which they cannot speak, they cannot tell us anything. So I did ethnography so as well and compare with these ecological patterns which get the clear meaning of course not clear, but at least hints of uses of bits inhabitants of cubes. Like this is me, the very one Kilos one as well as that picture there. In this ethnographic it was guided by these 3 questions to understand the types of beads currently used in Kilo Kiswahili, but also to understand the changes, if at all there, changes in beads over time, changes in the beads used over time, but also to understand cultural functions of beads. The questions were mainly going through those there. After that, I did my analysis, whereby I did physical analysis, physical attributes. I considered bead types. I analyzed bead types. I also analyzed, I analyzed manufacturing methods of those beads which were found, studied the shape of the bead, color, as well as size. And from excavation, these were the results. More than 1,000 were glass beads, shell beads, and 7, followed by bones, then stones. In classifying the shape, most of them were oblate, followed by cylinder, parallel, and tubular. In total, I had found 1,037 beads. And in terms of bead color, most of them were blue, followed by red, yellow, black, green, until purple and indeterminate. In terms of size, the beads which I excavated, most of them were minute, which means less than 2.5 millimeters, and followed by small, then medium, large, like that. So what does this result imply? The analysis reveals the domination, the dominance of hand-drawn beads, hand-drawn type of glass beads in all 3 trenches, then followed by wounds. But also it is drawn beads because they say drawn beads are simple to manufacture. Maybe that's why you find lots of them. They were easy to manufacture. These are drawn beads, some sort of saddle. Those are the ones which say drawn beads. These which are parallel lines are the ones that we say. So most of them were drawn beads. Then, next slide. Results from National Museum now. As I said, I also visited National Museum, the documentary materials, documented materials. Nearly all beads that she discovered was one of the. So I analyzed this material. from elite settlements were founded at communal settlements. So the beads that were found at elite settlements were the most of the communal settlements. This means now the elites and communals had equal access. This makes sense. The needs that were found in common, in elites were similar to commoners. So that's the first evidence that these people accessed these materials at the same time. And these were some these were some of the elites that were found that in its settlements. Now, results of this from ethnography, here comes the interesting part which I like. One of the results or one of the uses the people just want to say these are objects of decorations. They can be embedded shoes and bags, as bracelets, chain, as more people use these for. And this is not show you one chain bracelet. But another use of this that people told me was that they use these as medicine or curative objects. Which kind of beads? Green color, they said it's green color, yellow, white, red, or black. And I was so lucky to find one of the people there. And she was wearing this beads, and she was the one telling me the functions of those beads. And she said it helps her to calm the spirits. When sometimes the spirit comes up, the little girl falls, she makes noises, she starts beating herself. I think you understand that? The spiritual kind of thing.
You have 3 minutes left. 3 minutes.
3 minutes. So they use black, white, and red to calm the spirits together with this piece of wood, which you can see. But they say they use also beads as teaching objects. That red, white, and black color are the beads which are used for educational objects. Like black is used for showing pubic hair, white for white things which usually come out from a woman, and red for menstruation. And they also say they use beads for triggering sexual gratification, and any color could be used according to the scores, what color he likes. And they say they use beads to shape body, making body objects. Like men would wear here to make their hands look muscular, and women would wear here to make the waist look thin and things like that. And so from this, we learn that the archaeological communal areas, material culture show long settlement differentiation. And Chinese porcelain and celadon from Burundi, which were found, indicate access to imported goods also like ordinary people, but also the presence of exotic materials at the inhabited settlements tell that it is sometimes difficult to claim social status on the basis of exotic items alone. And archaeologists should consider peripherals when exploring evolution of early urbanization. So the study confirms access and consumption of this kind of beads and in this kind of material culture. As you can see, we learned that size was consumed according to the uses that they wanted to use. They couldn't obtain large size beads to wear on the waist or to wear here. So we find small size beads because of the functions that we are using. And the choices was intentional and not forced. As well as the selection of color depended on the functions that they wanted to use. And we also learned that beads to Africans' necessity due to their cultural uses and ability to transform or serve sociocultural roles. Conclusively, I can say this paper has illustrated that elites did not significantly influence the basic traditional uses of the indigenous community in Kivu, despite intermingling and intermarriage with the ethnic group they encountered and even conquered. And so despite the interaction, indigenous maintained their ethnicity, cultural meaning, and identity. Allow me to end here. because of time. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for your insightful presentation. So now we are going to be moving to the Q&A section, and yeah, the questions are supposed to be constructive, right? If you want to give feedback, let it be constructive. Don't give feedback in such a way that would, discourage people, because as you know, most of this work are work in progress. So does anybody have any question on Zoom and in person? All right. So I think I'll go first. So I have like, sorry?
You have two people. Three now.
Okay. All right. There's also a question on Zoom for Emilio. So Emilion, Elias is asking you that given the evolving nature of migration governance, particularly in light of travel and visa restrictions imposed by the current US administration, what do you see as the best societal implications of your findings?
Yes, thank you very much, Elias, for your question. I would say that from my findings and from what we are currently seeing that is currently playing out on the global stage, it's not just anti-Blackness or the purposeful limiting of migrants from global south to global north is not just limited to North Africa, although we are seeing it play out more in North Africa because of the way that, the externalization of the border actually leads to risk politics in North Africa. But beyond North Africa, even in West Europe, in Eastern Europe, in the US right now, we are seeing deliberate acts of migration deterrence going on. We see that, with this current administration, with sort of visa bans for like 12 countries, and these 12 countries are domiciled in the South, and many of them are in Africa. And currently seeing, I would say what we're currently seeing or what we're currently experiencing. So in Germany, we have the same thing going on, where Germany is currently proposing that even citizens that their citizenship have not been ratified would be deported. And the proposed deportation, or the proposed third country for deportation is actually Rwanda. We saw the United Kingdom also propose the same thing in 2024, saying that African migrants would actually be deported to Rwanda. So it's not just, we are seeing a global deterrence towards non-white bodies playing out. So this migration politics isn't just restricted to, North Africa, but we are seeing the epidemialization of race in North Africa because, North Africa has always had this historical contingency with like race and anti-Blackness, and the externalization of the border is making it play out more in North Africa. But like what my findings or the global implications of my finding is that what we are currently seeing or what we're currently experiencing is that surveillance technologies and migrant deterrent measures are actually measures that are being used against non-white bodies in this contemporary time or in this current time that we are on. Thank you. I hope that answers your questions. Thank you.
Okay, we have another question from Abubakar. He said, do you think the EU border policy contributed to the current situation in North Africa, or is it something independent?
Oh, that's actually quite interesting. The EU border policy, actually, what is going on in North Africa now is not just the direct, how would I put it? It's not just the direct influence of the EU border policy. It's something that started after 9/11, immediately after 9/11, with these five countries sharing intelligence. But it was actually further escalated during the 2015 migrant crisis, which also, directly ties to like the EU border policy, which we are also still seeing playing out in this current time. UK, the United Kingdom is not a country that's, how do I explain this? The United Kingdom, for example, I think that was like last month or 2 months ago, we saw the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom saying things such as, we no longer want migrants, the time for citizenship will be extended. And even beyond that, making particular notions towards border crisis. The EU doesn't have, I want to say right now that the EU doesn't have a border crisis going on within the EU because the EU doesn't have, the EU is not surrounded by, I keep saying EU instead of UK because the UK is currently not surrounded by waterways through which migrants come in. Waterways through which migrants come in, you can see places like Italy or things like that. But the UK making that statement, the Prime Minister of the UK making that statement shows that it's a deliberate act of migrant deterrence going on, um all over Europe or basically with like European Union countries. And it's also something that's extending to the Americas, which we see with, the current president's anti-immigrants policies that are currently going on.
Thank you. Do we have any questions in the room?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have observations and little question. I want to ask Emilia in her arguments concerning racialization of border crisis and migration. I want to know if it's just based on race or based on people that have been racialized, because I've seen situations where it's an economic driven kind of gesture where people who are in a very economically tight situation, even if they happen to be indigenous to that particular space, want to migrate to places of greener pastures. I don't know if in her findings she's able to see migrants within North America, North Africa, who are indigenous to that space, who are trying to go all over Europe, because most times you find people from the South or West African countries moving to North Africa so as to cross the border that is leading towards Europe. So we find out that these people are being taken advantage of by North African people, and then at the end of the day being sold across the border as slaves or kept within that particular space. So I want to know if in your findings you are able to find markers that indicate that indeed, even within the indigenous population, they are also suffering from having that kind of challenge. That is for Amelia. And then secondly, I want to ask the last presenter on ethnicity, Nima. Although these are archaeological findings, I don't know if somehow men are involved in the findings when you talked about the social stratification that comes with what has been done at the beats and all that. I don't know if there are indicators showing that some of the beats are actually for men or for women, because you made mention of the one with women. I talked about the one for menstruation and the one for the spiritual inclination. So I don't know if the beats, even while they are indicative of from the royal class of aristocracy and the normal people who are just struggling, if there are indicators to show that these indeed from the beats are male related and female related. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for your question. I'd like to start that your question is actually very interesting. I would like to answer your question from the perspective of the research that I also did while conducting, the field work for this study. And I found that for instance, in Italy, the data collected, there was this research on data collected in about Italian asylum seekers in Italy between 2008 and 2023. And we found that, of course, the highest number of asylum seekers per country, the first was Nigerians. We had like 131,000 asylum seekers that were granted asylum that were Nigerians. And then we had Libyans and also Moroccans on the list. So we had like asylum seekers from Libya and Morocco actually, also crossing also crossing the Mediterranean Sea into Italy and into other countries. And I want to draw back to what border externalization really is. Border externalization is about outsourcing the borders to like another country to prevent movement. So you're not just preventing movement of like other citizens, you're also preventing movement from your own citizens as well. But during the course of my research, I actually did not find that, indigenous North Africans themselves were as racialized as sub-Saharan Africans. Although my research solely focused on the experiences and things that were happening with sub-Saharan Africans, that is Black African migrants within North Africa. And as you know, North Africans themselves do not identify as Africans. When you feel like all these identity forms online, they'll tell you Black or African American, and then they would say North African or Middle Eastern or Arab or things like that. So what I'm saying is that North Africa itself has always had this history of not identifying with Blackness, not identifying with Blackness on the African continent, deliberately disassociating itself from the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. So this is like the premise upon which my work is built, that if North Africa, particularly Libya and Morocco, have this history with race and racialization and what it means to be Black or what it means to be Arab within North Africa, then how does this actually affect Black African migrants from sub-Saharan Africa who are trying to use this route to migrate to, Europe? So what I basically dealt with this research is the racialization of Black African migrants in Africa. But your question is actually very interesting, and I hope that I answered it as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your interesting question.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll start by saying from the area I did research,
Yeah.
even network students.
Yeah.
And for this spiritual, actually the one who selects which kind of fits where solution of the
Okay.
she fits the spirits, and then you can okay, you have to wear a red bit or something. Don't wear a black bit because of and believe me, it's strict. They organize it. Because with this lady, she was making noise and she was running here and there. After wearing the bit and piece of wood, that's very good. And so, but also it depends on the style. Men have the benefit that they wear to represent something, and women have. For instance, it's like a pregnant woman during her first pregnancy, it's a square white mask. So I'm very sure even the men may be that there, and so it depends on the touch of people. So that's true.
So they have another question in the house, and after that, we have someone raising their hand online.
I think what kind of question?
Well, the question passed.
Yeah, I think what kind of like this question.
No, I think.
No, you need to.
Just a quick one. Mine is not a question, but just a little clarity on the issue of immigration and migration. I think what is happening now in Europe and in the West,
Yeah.
the policy, it is not about Black, but it's about foreigners in general, because of the global economic situation. I would say, for example, in the UK, the numbers of asylum seekers are the Middle East, people from Algeria, Syria, and the likes. So if you check the data in the UK, those that claim asylum seekers enter the UK legally. Then when the visa run out, not for the next option for them to remain in the country is to claim asylum. So the current situation now on the global scale is not particularly targeted at the Black or the Arabs. It is just anti-immigration generally. Hence the rise of far right in the West. Check Italy, check UK. check America, perhaps, check Austria, check Netherlands. So it cuts across. I just thought it's important to make that clarity.
Thank you. So we have someone raising their hand.
I would like to.
Okay. Okay.
I think I would like to respond to that observation and also draw attention to something really important. While it is not specifically targeted at Black, I want to say that it is also targeted at non-white bodies. What the current global migration policy or global migration deterrence that we're seeing, you said in your statement that we have a rise in far right leadership globally, looking at the Americas, looking at Germany, looking at all of those countries, even looking at the UK, the coming or the incoming election would basically almost favor far right leadership. But what is happening is not just about anti-immigration or, because of economic crisis. The rise of far right leadership has propelled a rise in anti-immigration policies that are targeted at non-white bodies. Look at the US specifically. Why were white South Africans actually granted asylum or granted free refugee passage into the US? And this was done in less than 2 weeks. Asylum process in the US takes 2-3 years, but for white South Africans, it was in less than 2 weeks. So while we might say, oh, economic crisis, the rise of far-right leadership has also propelled anti-immigration deterrence against non-white bodies. I'm not specifically saying that it is against Black bodies that are being targeted globally, that it is only Black bodies, but non-white bodies in general. This Western and this, global North countries are fed up with immigrants that are not white.
Thank you.
This
You're very correct. Not to take away from what you said, but just to add to it to go a step further. When we are making law, they're not making laws based on the toleration. The EU law, there are several countries within the EU that they are not part of the European bloc. So when they make a policy, if you go to UK now, for example, since the new government came in, they've deported over 10,000 Europeans that are not part of the Schengen bloc back to their country. And you talk about most of them Euro-Asia. Do you get the point? You have Europe and Euro-Asia. So I think it's always to make a fair balance, because it's the area I have a little bit more information and I know a little about. I know it will affect that because of our in-house economic situation that we need to go abroad. And here in Nigeria, they call it Japa. Japa syndrome is affecting a lot in the UK. Say, for example, since after COVID, over 500,000 Nigerian students enter the UK. They will need roads, they will need school, they will need hospital, they will need jobs. That affected the local situation level. Hence, the locals are saying, oh, I cannot go to my GP or to see my doctor as frequent as I used to, because the GP and the doctor, they have to see a lot more patients. So these are the things that influence. And also remember, please, Zimbabwe, we have white Zimbabwe, we have white South Africans. So when they're making this policy, they do it like a blanket that goes across.
Thank you. So now I think I'm going to allow Elizabeth to speak. Jeff. Let's say it's
Hello, good morning from New York. I thank you very much. Can you hear me?
That's good time.
All right, thank you for your presentation. I think I disagree with the person who made a comment, because one thing I was going to ask is the historicization of the politics of migration. I think if you do this, the anti-Blackness elements of it would be very clear.
there may be strains on social services, but those strains are not caused by migrants or immigrants. It's caused by the politics of neoliberalism and cutbacks on certain social services, and then enhancement of, you know, I don't know, privileges that devolve to more affluent fractions of the population. And you see that going on in the United States. I've been here for 44 years. I'm also a professor who studies migration, and I've been doing that since 1995. So I think that especially Africans need to educate themselves on the history of the politics of migration and the policies as they have evolved. They have not been fair to Black people. Now, about Blackness also, and the Arab Africans not asserting Blackness. I think African Americans have the same complaint about us Africans, because when we come to the US, we say we are not Black, we're African, or I'm not even African, I'm Nigerian, or whatever. Some people identify as West Africans in New York here. And the essence of those identities that we affirm is that we're trying to separate ourselves from the diaspora of Africa that was created as a result of slavery. So this thing about identity and how it is affirmed and asserted and the implications, they are very complex. But to say about bias against Black people, please, I would say go and do very careful historical and contemporary analysis, and you can see the bias clearly. And then as to the justification that is given by people who are xenophobic, they would tell you it's because, space is scarce, resources are scarce, but then at the same time, you would see populations that are desired being actively recruited and resourced in this same terrain of scarcity. So, but everybody has a right to their own perspective. But then if you're doing research and you're doing analysis, it has to be grounded in fact. And then sometimes what we're seeing today has a deep history that one needs to go and excavate and really carefully sort out. Because, the US immigration policy is racist. The way people are treated is racist. The advantages, the perception of who is deserving is very racist. And anything else, if we are just deceiving ourselves, by saying it's not about us. Yes, everybody is involved. You can see all these people coming from places where they need things that they can't get, including refuge or asylum or economic opportunities. But the way in which they're sorted in the immigration process is very different. And then the perception of being deserving of whatever resources there are, it's also handled differently. And so, if people who are and I'm also a bit distressed about us Nigerians, because I think we need to do more in terms of this historical, going back and then really deeply thinking about identity and the politics of race and, migration. It's very clear that there's discrimination. Thank you very much.
If I can just just said. Thank you very much. That was so wonderful. And I just want to add that many of these immigration policies that we see are based on anti-Black logics. For example, detention and deportation was developed off the return of Black people to Sierra Leone and to Liberia. So many of these logics that were developed to curtail migration deterrence were built off the encampment and the curtailance of Black movements. So these technologies today are actually developed based off restriction of Black movement. And if they were developed based on anti-Black technologies, therefore, who are the first populations that these technologies are targeted against, or these policies are targeted against? But, as you just rightly said, we always want to tag this good migrant and bad migrant, and automatically Black and brown bodies, are automatically seen as bad migrants until they prove themselves wrong or right. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Okome. Yeah, and I do agree. The desirability politics cannot be, we cannot separate it from migration, especially when it comes to Black and brown bodies. And like Emilion said, we can always trace that to the transatlantic slave trade, right? And even the ledger system and all of that. So yeah, do we have any more questions in the room?
All right.
All right.
So, thank you so much for your session and presentation. But I was really hoping to hear from Abubakar, because it looks like it was really the first presenter who was responding to a lot of questions. Anyway, my only question to Abubakar, the second presenter, would be what was his data source? The presentation he did. Could he elaborate a little bit more on the data source for which he conducted the research? Thank you.
Okay, so you want to say something about the data sources that you talked about?
Yes. Could you tell us, yes, about your data source for the research you conducted?
Okay, so I'm basically focusing on a fictional work, which is Behold the Dreamers. And I chose the book simply because all the works that people have been doing, mostly on migration, when I was developing the paper, was doing some kind of field work, ethnographic things, ethnographic stuff. So I look on the other side to see what's happening maybe in the fictional world. And I know there have been also a lot of work on maybe work by Adichie, work by Chika, Inigwe, and other writers in Africa as well, maybe different parts of the continent. So I decided to look into Central Africa, and I chose this writer who has her origin from Cameroon to see exactly what's going on about the issue of now not necessarily something that is happening right at the physical border, but in relation to temporalities and how bureaucracy, the immigration system also is deliberately structured to, restrict the kind of people that the country can take in. You look at the US and you see how different use of temporalities have been examined within this, within the presentation, but this is something that you can also see in the fictional work. So I would basically say I combine fictional work and then some kind of critical discourses that you can see.
Yes.
That I got from community is that, it influences ethnicity, or that it reflects pre-existing ethnic categories. So I don't know if you can unpack that more.
We didn't get the question.
And then for Abubakar,
we had
sorry?
we had network issue, internet issue. So could you please rephrase the question?
All right, so I'll repeat that. For Nima, I said, how do you theorize the relationship between materiality and ethnic identity formation in the Swahili coast? Then also, when you mentioned material culture, the impression that I got from that is that it constitutes ethnicity, right? So my question is that when we trace that to pre-ethnic formation, like, is that still a thing? And then for Abubakar, you mentioned the concept of, I think it was social lag, right? And how it influences immigration system. So my question is, how does this show temporal sovereignty? And also, who controls times in these encounters? Are there like actors actively involved in that, or is it just a matter of the immigration system?
Thank you for your question. What I'll say on that is that what my research really intended to answer is that the interaction which the outside people brought living in Kila Kiswahili, the interaction, I mean, the way they interacted with the local community didn't really change the cultural logic or cultural meaning of the materials that local community would use on how they was consuming the materials didn't really change their culture or their beliefs or rather their identity. Question interaction, the local community maintained the meaning of the materials. Or they also consumed not because they were imported, not because they were good looking, not because of anything that they considered that made people that should consume because of that. They consumed following their cultural logic and cultural meaning. I hope I answered your question.
All right, thank you. So Abubakar, we have less than 8 minutes. So if you could quickly answer the question so that we can wrap up.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So, talking about social jet lag, you see, as immigrants, when you arrived and maybe you need to change your status so that you be integrated or integrated into the society. So you need papers. And because you need paper, it takes time to get this paperwork done. So you experience prolonged idleness, which is your social jet lag. Being idle, doing nothing, getting stuck somewhere where you cannot move forward or backward. So because we are talking about time as well, so the person who controls time is important, or who keeps you waiting. So in this case, you have the whole bureaucratic system, and bureaucracy is always something difficult to pin down because there's really no single individual that you can blame to say, oh, this is the bureaucracy that keeps me waiting, that gets me stuck here. So it's the whole system designed in such a way that, like the presenter Emilio mentioned, that sift through desirable and undesirable. So who are the people, different categories, different pipeline that we can quickly push through the society, and who are the people that we can, hold back until maybe we sort out some of the ways in which we can take them in. So that's exactly how I see the system. Is not just about the individual doing the things, of course, individual perception, feeling, influence, some other things, but it's largely the bureaucracy itself that's responsible anywhere where maybe, let's just say the West, Europe and North America. So you find the same thing within the bureaucracy. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, thank you everyone for this wonderful session. And yeah, this has been fun. I've learned a lot and it has been intellectually engaging. So we have the part 2 of this panel on Saturday. I think that will be like 11 p.m. No, a.m. West African time. So if you can make it, we would appreciate it. So are there any closing remarks before we end this? All right then. Bye everybody, and thank you once again.
Bye. See you on Saturday.
All right, see you. Bye.